That's how money is being used, basically. I think that's just the gist of it. Now, I won't be speaking alone on this. As usual, I have a guest, Mr. Olumi Wadibayo. He's the chairman of the Committee of Finance Experts of NECA. That's chairman of Committee of Finance Experts of NECA. You're welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, good morning.
Now, don't forget, I'm sure if you have questions or comments, the number is 0813 331 3172. 0813 331 3172. That's the number to call in. Now, let me go straight. Let's just go straight to the gist and let's just start talking about it. Right now, if you want to um, talk about the businesses, I would just want you to like give us a recap because usually we talk about the state of businesses, but from your own perspective, from your own point of view, talk about the state of the challenges businesses face in Nigeria today.
Okay, thank you very much. Today, in Nigeria, most of the businesses are facing a lot of challenges. Though it's not unique to Nigeria, it's more or less a global issue. But again, there are some issues that are peculiar to Nigeria in our own perspective, and those issues are localized. For example, we have poor infrastructure that supports businesses on a long-term basis. Also, we have issues that borders on policy inconsistency from the government perspective, which also impede planning.
We
And
have a
planning,
lot. This issue of policy inconsistency is a really big problem because it seems to be reoccurring over and over again in all the discussions.
yes, it may likely continue in that light. It depends on the perspective to which the bureaucrats, which means people that formulate those policies, people responsible for implementing those policies, which are more or less civil servants, public servants, have to overall objective because even in businesses, when you say you are planning, you are putting up strategies, it's more or less looking at scenarios, trying to model situations, possible outcomes, look at various alternatives. But from the government perspective, maybe they don't have luxury of time because of the tenure of the public servants, and everybody is looking at short-term goal in which they believe they can achieve, and their policies are usually driven by achieving those short-term goals, just to be able to probably convince the electorate, okay, because the cycle of elections is over 4 years, and that naturally might be the bane or the problem to this inconsistency. And also because there are always changes from the public servant, like the ministers, the PAMSECs, and some other things. Therefore, everybody comes with their own idea, and most times they jettison what was already on ground, or because most of those plans are not necessarily long term. Apart from that, we have issue about corruption, which is corruption is not unique to Nigeria; it's a global problem. But again, probably the degree is what varies in this part of the world. And vis-a-vis issue of trying to make ease of doing business a reality, even though the current administration has tried a lot. If you remember, the first executive order, which is EO1, was on ease of doing business. Okay, but one thing is that we have policies, good policies, but the other problem is implementation of those policies is the major challenge. And therefore, I believe that the new government that will be coming in should be able to address most of that.
Okay. All right. So let's go to fiscal policies. I want you to explain what fiscal policies are in the first place.
Okay, when you look at it, with respect to trying to formulate economic policy towards driving economic buoyancy and prosperity, you have two principal policies: monetary and fiscal policy. Monetary speaks to issue of using uh, things like CBN reserve, interest rates, um, selling treasury bills, and other instruments to more or less rejuvenate the economy, let the economy be buoyant, and where the economy is in buoyance and is affecting inflation, you also use those policies to more or less reduce inflation and some other things like that. But when it comes to fiscal policy effect is much more felt on the part that fiscal policy borders more on how government generates revenue, which is much more of taxes, and how government expend those money, which is the expenditure aspect of it. But today we are speaking to tax policy, which means the revenue generation aspect
Okay,
of
of
the
the
fiscal
fiscal
policy,
policy.
which speaks to tax revenue.
Okay, so I'm sure a lot of people will be very interested in this. So if you have your questions, please just get them down and let's have your questions on 0813 331 3172. Taxes, that's always something that um, concerns everybody. In the business environment, speak to us about the tax regime that is working now and ways of improving.
Okay, in the last
I'll,
few years,
mhm.
there have been developments, there have been some kind of improvement in our tax administration, both at the federal level and in some states. Okay, and this can be assigned to the fact that Nigeria has continued to imbibe more of the international conventions and practices that we can localize here and which has been done, and also technology to some degree has been harnessed. Okay, but the level we are, is here a satisfactory level? The answer is no. We can always still have improvements, likewise in the developed world. Now, the improvement will be much more on how can we make the tax system more robust, how can we make the tax system more fair and equitable, how can we make the tax system more convenient and more certain, which are the principles that underline any effective tax system in the world. And those are the things I think we need to speak to. Likewise, we also need to improve on technology, all because technology is a tool that enable effectiveness in whatever you do. And one thing that technology speaks to is that once you bring in technology to it, it makes evasion more difficult to doing, unlike manual system that can be more or less replaced or more or less manipulated in a principle. Even though technology has its own challenges, but it's more or less stand the test of time, and it put a trail by the time you want to investigate and some other things like that.
All right, I want you to talk about one of the major tax challenges that we face when it comes to business owners. I know that one of the things that a lot of people talk about is double taxation, and so talk to us about that. And start with the issue of double taxation,
Okay,
multiple taxation.
okay, yeah. People sometimes misconstrue double taxation with multiple.
Mm.
Okay, what we have as a challenge is more of multiple taxation. Okay, double taxation usually come by way of cross-border transactions where
Okay.
you are doing business in Nigeria and you are doing the business with somebody abroad, and you're subject to tax in Nigeria and you are equally subjected to tax.
Okay.
And there are international treaties to minimize that or eliminate it, which we call double tax treaties.
Mm.
Okay, but let's leave that. Let's come to what we
Yeah.
have control over, which are multiple taxations. Okay, now when you look at it first, legally, if you look at the Tax and Other Levies Act, you will see that we have scores of taxes. First, there are three levels of taxes based on the tiers of government: the federal,
Mm-hmm.
the state, and the local taxes. Today, at federal level, taxes ranges close to about 12 items, if not
What?
more. Yeah,
Only at federal.
only at federal. State is, uh, as of today, if you look at state varies from state to state, but the minimum you can see in any state is about 13, 14,
Ah.
and you can see as much as 20. And for local
For one
governments,
business to pay.
not necessarily for one business, but
Okay.
it cuts across it. But at least there are multiple layers to which a business can even pay as much as that number.
Wow.
Okay, and when you also look at local government have in excess of 30. Okay, but again, when you look at local government, there are much more of levies, all these market levy, road, issue of TV licenses and some other things like that. But let's look at it. Now, what is the problem with that? If you look at our record, okay, you'll find out that income tax from the aspect of corporate, which I can call corporate taxes, account for significant number of non-oil tax revenue. which is about 50%, followed by VAT and personal income tax. You now find out that not more than 5 to 6 of all of these taxes account for about 95% of our tax revenue. The question then is, why then create that
So many.
bottleneck? Why the red tape? Which then means that what we have been advocating with respect to tax policy reformation is to say, can't we more or less trim these tax regimes into what is feasible so that we can be able to align with the basic principles of how easy it is, how certain it is, so that you don't create complexity. Because once the ambiguity, what you create is uh, bureaucracy, and what follows bureaucracy is corrupt practices, tax evasion, and some other things like that. Which then means that governments, both the state and the federal, through the joint tax board, can sit down to say, okay, why can't we be much more effective by identifying the critical aspect of the tax regimes that is much more valuable towards making ease of doing business a reality and also enhancing government tax revenues. And those are the things that we are more or less promoting and advocating for.
Okay, so um, still on the taxes now, and you talked about there are ways, there should be ways to streamline it, and so I want you to talk to the these different layers. How are, first of all, are companies? Is it easy to pay all these layers?
It's not that easy. Why? Because most of these taxes are not necessarily paid to a particular authority. Okay? And two, not all these taxes are immediately due at the same time. And again, there is no synergy in trying to harmonize it in such a way that you can make it a one stop shop in administering those taxes. Rather, you are dealing with various departments within the same internal revenue service or inland revenue service, and this department is dealing probably with a particular tax, the other department is dealing with another tax, another tax authority is dealing with another tax. At the end of the day, a single business is facing series of bottlenecks across those lines. And the issue there is that most times you will now find businesses involving in much more of administration of taxes rather than focusing on
On
the
their
businesses.
business. Okay.
And the issue is that prosperity of a business always, no matter the level of evasion, translate to increased tax revenue. But there's no amount of effectiveness in tax administration without business prosperity that can turn to higher revenue, because tax revenue is a function of business prosperity.
Prosperity. So talk. Okay. So now let's talk about these tax policies. That's well, for the incoming government, the policy that you feel should work for a better business environment.
Okay, now we felt that first, what the new government need to do is probably to more or less set an agenda for the tax authorities to be able to simplify most of these processes, remove more of the administrative bottlenecks. And one of the easiest way of doing that is through technology, so that I need not interface with any individual in the whole process of
Paying taxes.
paying my taxes, filing my returns, getting my tax certificates, which is a proof of compliance and some other things. And that will make it much more effective. Okay? And also, government just need to more or less sit down, because this is both national and subnational, which means let us harmonize our taxes, so that if at federal level the entire tax is 5, at state level probably 5 or 6, and at local government probably 5, I think it will be much more effective to administer. Okay, and those are the things we are looking at for. And also, I think government also need to provide enabling environments which guarantee business prosperity. Okay, which means once the economy is doing well, average businesses will do well, and that will translate to increase in revenue, increase in profit, and at the end of the day, tax is always a function of your profit or your revenue, as the case may
So
be.
if you have more profit, at least you'll be able to pay more taxes. So
Exactly.
it's a good win-win for both
It's
sides.
a win-win situation, and that is what we are more or less advocating from a business perspective. And also, we felt that in doing this, also there's a role to which monetary policy play, and that's why you see that there should be synergy in any ideal economy between monetary policy of the CBN and the fiscal policy of the federal government. For example, to also create economic prosperity, where the prosperity lies are in small, medium enterprises. And what is lacking in that space is access to credit. Okay, because in Nigerian financial institution, what you require to have credit is much more of collateral. Okay, but again, most of these small businesses, like any other small business in the Western world, always require government support, like government credit guarantee, government assets, and some other things, which means small businesses are greater employer of labor, because by the time you have little restaurants, a little bar, and also of things having 5 employees and the rest, by the time you aggregate them, they are the employers of labor rather than the big corporation, which means that government also needs to support in that. And that support also should entail infrastructural development, which will serve a long-term objective. And one of the key aspects of it is issue of power. Once there's power, there will always be production. And once there's production, it increases economic activity, so that we can even be net exporter of most things we produce in excess of what we consume. Even if we don't produce in excess of what we consume, we will limit what we import, and therefore there won't be pressure on Nigerian naira. All of these things are things that need to be put in place vis-a-vis other infrastructure such as road infrastructure, water infrastructure, education, so that we can also have the manpower to increase productivity. Because if you look at it, there are various resources employed in production. There is capital, there is resources in terms of material, and there's human, which is the most important resource. Because when you have all of this and there's no technical skill to more or less integrate all of these other resources together, what you get is low productivity.
Okay, you mentioned in other countries, in developed countries, where the government assists smaller businesses. Are there other policies that we can emulate from developed countries?
Yes, first, we'll give kudos to the current administration based on Finance Act, which has more or less allows small businesses which earn revenue not in excess of 25 million to pay company income tax at 0%, which means in principle they are exempted from paying corporate taxes,
Okay.
which is a good development. Also for medium, that is once your turnover is more than 25 but less than 100 million, you're also paying at a lower rate of 20%, whereas normal company pay at 30%, as the case may be. But beyond that, and beyond enabling environment I've discussed, we also need issue of tax incentive. That is, why do you give such incentive? Is to encourage economic activity, so that where you need more of economic activity and businesses are not looking at that space, what you do is that you create tax incentive in order to drive people there. For
What? Okay,
example,
I want you to
yeah,
say what are tax incentive and what?
yeah. For example, you can create incentive in such a way that if small businesses of certain cadre more or less have employment of certain level, probably they also get additional incentive regardless of the turnover. Because again, I've said turnover is a function. 25 million as a turnover make you pay zero tax. That is company income tax, not other taxes.
Other taxes.
Okay,
You have said that there are different levels.
exactly.
Okay.
Make you pay zero tax there. But most times in today's world, because the price levels of items have increased, virtually most businesses turnover has gone beyond that. Which that means that technically, most you call small businesses have turnover above that, even when your profit is so small. Whereas probably micro businesses are still the one that will benefit from that stuff. Which then means that what you then need to do is to give other incentives to more or less promote economic activity.
Like what kind of incentives can government offer?
Okay, for example, you can offer incentive in which you have government grant, which is also part of fiscal policy, which
Policies,
means
yeah.
you give government grant to small businesses, if not credits. Okay, credit you can give by way of guarantee those credits with financial institution, but grant is more or less like giving them money to start up something or to enhance what they're doing. Another incentive you can give them is most businesses also are operating where there are lack of infrastructure, which then means that anyone that invests in such infrastructure, you can further give them incentive. There is an incentive that uh, exists currently, even though in the finance bill of 2022, which has not yet become an act, they try to eliminate that or scrap it, and that is rural investment allowance. And that incentive also is not something you can easily get, because the condition there is that once you provide infrastructure such as electricity, road, and water within a distance of 20 kilometers from where
Company.
such company operates. But the question is 20 kilometers is too far apart. Most businesses are not clustered around communities that are not that distant, which then means that that benefit in principle, barely do you get it. Which then means that regardless of such distances, once it is evident that such infrastructure are provided in order to do your business. For example, average business in Nigeria, especially small businesses, provide their own power at exorbitant cost, because the economic activity are not large enough to absorb the cost of this power. Which then means that certain incentive can be given depending when a country is able to provide sustainable power.
Okay.
Which then means that government can do all of those things in order to promote economic prosperity among the small
So
businesses.
basically, you're saying that since we can't provide this for you for ease of business for you, we'll give you like a relief when it comes to some taxes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right. We're running out of time at this point, but is there anything you quickly like to add before I go to any other question about taxes in the country?
Okay, like businesses also, we need to ask ourselves from the statistic. When you look at the globe, you discover that of all this range of taxes, you find out that more taxes are from personal income taxes, which means individual
Yeah.
taxes, because for example, our population is about 200 million. And probably when we look at working population, probably we can say it's 100 million. Or because of poverty level and some other things, let us even discount it to be 50 million. But from the tax record, 50 million people are not paying taxes, which then means that there are a lot of things that government can do in expanding the net in order to capture both people in formal, informal
Well,
sector.
are people do people have enough confidence to be paying these taxes? Because from my conversations and or conversations I've heard, people are reluctant to key into this to pay taxes.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing there is that when we talk about tax, anywhere in the world is a compulsory levy. Okay, it's not something you pay on the premise that government is doing what you need to do or not, which then means it's a compulsory levy. Okay, but that doesn't stop the citizens' own advocacy or demanding for accountability and transparency. They are two separate things. Which then means that I always encourage people that it is not an excuse or a defense, because you evading tax is a crime. Which then means if you are charged to it, you can't defend it on the premise that government is not delivering, because it is not contractual, it's compulsion. Which then means that you need to pay your tax. And at that point in time, if average Nigerians are paying taxes the way it's supposed to be, we'll be able to stand up to government and demand for accountability. It's because most people are equally not paying or paying very low taxes, and therefore they don't have the confidence. Imagine when you look at people in UK, the effective tax rate ranges between 30 to 35% of their income in a month. The question then is, you could stand up to your prime minister to ask questions. Do you get what I'm saying now? And in that situation, it increases transparency and accountability. Okay, but when we look at businesses, we are saying that bulk of taxes should be from individual based on ability to pay, which means it must be progressive in nature, which means you should pay more than me because you earn income more than me. Okay, but again, the level of taxes also followed by VAT, which is a value-added tax, but corporate taxes need to more or less be reduced because Nigeria is one of the countries that have the highest rate of corporate taxes. And what is the danger there is that the higher the corporate taxes, the lower the productivity of those because they don't have enough money to invest and there's no incentive towards investing.
Okay,
And
we
that's
have.
what we need to consider.
All right, there's a lot to talk about taxes, but we have to end the program at this point in time. It's been interesting. Hopefully, we'll get to talk about this more and explain better for people to really understand the importance of paying taxes and what government does with the taxes in the first place. Thank you so much to my guests, Mr. Olumiwa Debayo, who is the chairman of the Committee of Finance Experts, NECA. Thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you, ma.
NECA Voice of Business will be back same time next week. My name is Olawumi Akon. I was been produced by David Kolalawal. To have a pleasant Tuesday.